at the same time. We have talked about that before here at New Hope, and one of the things that we find is that there are, all right, again, I know there are some of you now that are finally joining us here online in our Sabbath school this morning. We want to welcome you. If you are joining us either on the replay or live right now, just drop a message in the chat and let us know that you have stopped by here at New Hope this morning. All right, we're looking, just a quick review. We're going to spend the next 15 minutes or so in review of our Sabbath school lesson before we transition into our Discovery Factory for the day. All right, number one, we found out that the wrath of God is a what? It is a manifestation of the love of God. Oh, wow. The wrath of God is a manifestation of the love of God. That seems, tell me how that makes sense. Anybody, does that make sense to anybody you wrestle? How does that make sense to you? That the wrath of God is a manifestation of the love of God.
I'm going to try.
All right.
Okay. Sister First Lady, she's God. And Sister Hines and myself indulge in wrongdoing to Sister McLean. God, who is our judge, pour out his wrath upon us because we should know better for treating whatever we're doing to Sister McLean. So he loves us, but he still has to show us that we are wrong.
Okay, all right, I like it. All right, okay, all right. Yes, got another hand, Sister Paul. Don't stop telling her she's God. I can't.
I
take
just
that
had
home.
a really interesting thought about the wrath of God, and I remember being a child and some other kid getting a spanking, and their parents saying they were trying to beat the devil out of them.
Mercy. Wow.
And so I think that sometimes, you know, the child may have thought, my parent is cruel, they are evil, they're hurting me, but the parent saw something in the child that they wanted to free them from. It wasn't just vengeance, it was for the child's good.
Okay, wasn't just vengeance, God in being angry, you're saying for simply anger's sake, that he's trying to do something to better the individual on whom his wrath is being administered. Okay, good. Yes, Sister McLean.
I remember when my kids were young. When my kids were young, I say to them, don't do this, because if you do this, this is what will happen. And they defy what I say to them, and they go ahead and do it. And I whip them, I pray with them, and I say, because I love you, why you do this? And I say, I can't be understand. You say you love me, but you still spank me. But it was a discipline.
Okay, all right, all right. And so here's, I think, where a lot of us get caught up in trying to understand or explain or grapple with the wrath of God. We take a lot of our emotions and how we administer wrath, or when we get angry, and we project those emotions, those feelings, those motives, that rationale, we often project those onto God. Now, is that fair? Why is that problematic? Somebody tell me, why might that be problematic? If we're trying to explain or trying to understand God's wrath, if the only thing that we use it or we measure it against is our own wrath or our own anger, what's problematic with that process? Say it one more time, Sister McLean. God is divine and we are not. Okay, what does that mean, Elder Hines?
God is divine and we're not. That's what you asked.
Yeah, I mean, well, how does that play into this scenario of why it's a bad thing, or why is it problematic for us to ascribe our emotional response to evil to His?
So when I look at how long-suffering God is. He will have us doing things over and over and over and over and over and over again.
Okay.
But humankind, that's the difference between the divine and humankind. Humankind, we're not that long suffering. we're unforgiving.
Wow. Okay. All right. Somebody said, Sister McLean, I'm going to pick on you for a minute. You said that when you would tell your kids something to do and they wouldn't do it,
They're not to do.
that they're not to do, and they did it anyway, that could make us angry or make you angry. Did I understand that right?
No, I was not angry.
You weren't angry. Oh, bless the Lord. Oh, my soul. All right. So you weren't angry. Has anybody been angry when a child that didn't, you told them not to do it and they did it anyway? Did it make you angry? Yeah, or an adult. All right. So here's part of the challenge that I think that we wrestle with in this scenario, and that is that sometimes we get angry when in the face of wrongdoing or evil, not just because of the results or the impact that wrongdoing has on the wrongdoer or the objects of those wrongdoings, but sometimes we just get plain old angry and upset because, do you know who I am? Because ego is stomped on. Like, how dare you? What in the world was you thinking? I'm sorry. Were you thinking when you disregarded me, disrespected me? And so oftentimes there is an ego, there is a pride that gets hurt. And so the wrath has a little extra in it when we respond, and it is not only simply because we are trying to course correct the behavior in order to protect the individuals. Sometimes we're trying to protect our own feelings, our own ego, our own pride, and that's often the difference between how we administer wrath and God. Now, here's another one. Another reason that I think that is clear, and I think this was Sister McLean embedded innately in what you said, or implicitly in what you said, when she said that God is divine and we are not. The other thing that implies is that God not only is divine, but divinity comes alongside or comes with sovereignty. Sovereignty comes alongside, as we understand it, with omniscience and omnipotence. Oh, see, listen, when we say omnipotence, what do we mean? Anybody tell me, what do we mean when we say omnipotent? God is omnipotent. What does that mean? God is all powerful. When we say he is omnipotent or he is omnipotent, that he has all power. But all power, apart from omniscience, what is omniscience? What's a big word, but what does that mean? That he is also all knowing, that he has all knowledge. Do you know how dangerous omnipotence is in the absence of omniscience? That if you had all power, but if you did not also have the ability to know everything, there's a whole lot of dumb stuff, stupid stuff, wicked stuff that would end up being a result of the course of action if we had all power, but not all knowing. What does this mean? It means that God has not only, when God exacts his anger, when God administers his wrath, he does it while knowing all of the facts and all of the circumstances and all of the things that led up to you doing that act or you being engaged in that thing. He knows all of it. They didn't have to go to court. They don't have to go and have a discovery phase to find it out. God sees it and he knows it from the beginning to the end. And so when he takes action, it is because he already knows the whole story from the beginning to the end. Sister Paul.
I wanted to know if that is the response you would give to someone who reads the Bible and questions how God can be loving and at the same time have led his people into the genocide of other people. There were times when God said, kill everybody in the village, the women, the children, don't even leave any animals alive.
Cats, the dogs, and the aardvark.
Yeah, I've
Yes.
heard people say, how can God be loving and, allow those things to happen or other horrific things to happen? Is that the response that you would give somebody?
Absolutely. I don't know of any other response, that God knows the end from the beginning. He knows stuff that we don't know. He sees not just into the past, but also the present and into the future. And while I may not, and we may not understand it all, I have to accept or take by faith that he knows what he is doing. I do not know of any other response that I don't know that we can come up with a logical response that everybody would say, oh yeah, that makes sense. Why? Same thing as the reason, because we don't have all of the information. We can't see all of the stuff that remains. I saw another hand. Yes, this is Lucky.
Okay, it's for that same reason why he would take that action. He knows everything. He knows what will happen 5 years, 10 years down the road, what this community will become. Sometimes it's better for a few to be, look at us here on earth. We are quarantined, we are restricted here because we messed up. There are worlds out there who have never sinned. What would have happened if we were able to go back and forth? So we are restricted here.
Yeah. There's this thing, and for me, I think it is consolidated in the story of Job. I see it says, and in the story of Job, we see all of this calamity that befalls Job, while there is something that the text tells us is going on behind the scenes that Job and the other actors in the story are unaware of. He doesn't know that there's this conversation, this spectacle that is being created between God and Lucifer, and this conversation that we read in chapter 1. All Job knows is that there are two options that he has. One, he can say, like his wife said, he can curse God and die and say, God, why has all this befallen me? You're not a good God. You're not a just God. I didn't deserve this. He could go through all of that, which is what his wife kind of was pushing him to do. Or he could say, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. There has to be a point in the life of the people of faith where we can honestly and freely answer questions with this phrase: I don't know. Many times we put a lot of effort and energy into answering some questions that we're really not sure about, that we really don't have the full answer to. And so in our attempt to answer some questions that we don't really have the answers to, we confuse people more, we put more doubt in their mind than surety. And so at some point, I think there has to be a point where the people of faith, where we say, yeah, we are a people of faith, which means that there are some things that I do not understand right now, but by faith, I believe that one day I will be able to understand better by and by. Yes?
Yes, Pastor. God would not just wipe out a nation without warning them. So it got to be a reason. He don't destroy before he warns.
Good. By the way, there's a pragmatic relationship that everybody has with this concept. It may sound strange and foreign, like right now while we're sitting here talking about it, but there is a pragmatic relationship that we have with this. You'll understand it better by and by, right? You will tell your children, do not go and play in the... Do they understand it right then? Not necessarily. Some of them might. You will tell your child, do not take that water cup near that outlet? Do they understand why? No. But will they be able to understand it later? As they understand the relationship between water and electricity, as they begin to understand so many of these other things, there are some things in life that all of us sitting here now, that we understand now, that at some point we did not understand. They told you that you need to pray and fast before you get married. Woo! They said that you need to go and get some counseling before you stand at that altar and say, I do. There are some folk who didn't understand it then, but they sure enough understand it now. And there's the same thing, is that God sometimes will give us directions and will do things for us and to us and even through us that we might not understand right now, but at some point, as we grow, as we mature, as we develop, that we will be able to understand it better by and by. All right, I want to, I got a few minutes here, about 10 minutes, about 9 minutes. I want to get into some more of this Sabbath school lesson, talking about the wrath of God. Here we go. I want to read just the opening of the Sabbath school lesson because I thought it was very apropos. And by the way, when you read this lesson and when you consider what we are doing in today's intensive crime and social justice, it's almost as if we collaborated with the North American Division on this, on the General Conference with this lesson for today. Though God's compassion is often celebrated, many find the idea of his wrath disturbing. If God is love, they think he should never express wrath. That notion, however, is false. His wrath arises directly from his love. Some claim that the Old Testament God is a God of wrath and that the New Testament God is a God of love. But there is only one God, and he is revealed as the same in both Testaments, in the Old and the New. The God who is love becomes angry at evil. The God who is love becomes angry at evil. Aren't you glad that God becomes angry at evil? That he doesn't just see evil happening and is just kind of nonchalant and hands-off and laissez-faire about it. But God becomes angry at evil, but precisely because he is love. Jesus himself expressed profound anger against evil, and the New Testament teaches numerous times about the righteous and appropriate wrath of God. God's anger is always his righteous and loving response against evil and injustice. I'm going to hang out here for just a minute. God's anger is always his righteous and loving response against evil and injustice. What does that say to us as a people of faith that are attempting in our daily lives to be like Christ, to be like God, to be Christians or Christ-like? What does that say about our response to evil and injustice?
We're acting in the same way God knows. If we're not doing it because of pride.
Doing what?
When we go against evil or pride, when we go on behalf of the marginalized, the oppressed, that is, God has a concern for them, and we should too.
Okay, all right. Sister Paul.
And I would say that our Christian sensibilities should be offended when we see injustice against other people.
Yeah, very good. Our Christian sensibilities ought to be offended in the face of injustice, even if it is towards or enacted on somebody else. Anybody else? Anybody else? Real quick. I got about 5 minutes. So here we go. The response of the Christian to witnessing, not just experiencing, but witnessing evil and injustice based on the example of God ought to be anger. Oh, Pastor, slow down. The people of God, Christians, aren't supposed to be angry people. We're supposed to be happy people. We're supposed to be joyful people. We're supposed to be the salt of the earth. When people are around us, we're supposed to make them smile and feel the love and the warmth of God. But here we find that God, throughout the course of human events, throughout the biblical anthology, throughout the whole story, we find that God's response to evil and to injustice is an emotional response. Ooh, Dr. Wallen, I don't know if we can get this, that his response is a visceral one. He gets Aren't you glad that you serve a God who gets emotional over you? That when he sees you being mistreated, when he sees you being oppressed, when he sees injustice being exacted on you, that he doesn't just sit by idly on the sidelines and say, oh boy, I knew this was, listen. Understand this as well. We talked about at the beginning, we talked about the idea that God is an omniscient God, which means that he knows what? Everything from the beginning all the way to the end. There is nothing that takes God by surprise. And even though there is nothing that takes God by surprise, whenever he sees evil, whenever he sees injustice, even though he knew it was coming, he still gets emotional over it. He still gets angry and upset. So, for those of us who didn't know it was coming, what we're learning today is that the response of the people of faith in the face of injustice, in the face of oppression, in the face of evil, that the people of God, if we are trying to be like God, if we are telling people that we are trying to be Christ-like, then we also ought to have an emotional response that is exercised or that equates to anger when we see somebody else. By the way, God was getting angry not just when he saw his son dying on the cross, when he saw people taking his own son. God started getting angry all the way back in the Garden of Eden when he saw Cain kill Abel. So this is something that we see when not just when our personal family or our personal property or whatever is damaged, destroyed, taken advantage of, whatever, that anger, that response, that visceral response of the people of God to exercise this, here's a word, righteous indignation is something that is part of taking on the character of God. All right, got a hand here and then a hand back there.
And I was going to say, somebody mentioned it earlier, but we can't, I think Elder Hines mentioned it, you can't divorce the long-suffering and patience of God from the vengeance of God. So even when we think about Nineveh, right, those people, God was going to wipe them out, but he still gave them an opportunity to repent, and they did. So even if we are the ones who are the offenders and the ones exacting injustice and evil, God still wants to redeem us.
Mercy. He is long suffering. We learned, yes, Brother Thomas, and then Brother.
Yes, I want to point briefly back to the story of Israel. Israel, when they decided that they want a king, and the reaction of Samuel The action was not taken against Samuel, it was against God because they was rejecting God. But look at the behavior of Samuel, so much so that God had to ask him, why are you angry? It is not you that they are doing this thing against.
Mercy.
It is me. But Samuel's behavior in the sight of injustice was the same behavior that we all also should have, even though it is not against us. Once it offends God, it should also offend us.
Mercy, mercy, mercy. Yes, Brother Walker.
What does God anger look like when he's angry?
What does God's anger look like when he's angry? What does God's anger look like when he's angry? Can I show you what it doesn't look like? You ready? This is what it doesn't look like.
Not at all. Couldn't be.
I've got sunshine in my soul too. Ooh, look at that. Oh my. Yeah, that's not what it looks like. God's anger and God's wrath does not look like, what's the word I'm looking? Apathy. It does not look like he is disinterested. It does not look like he is not paying attention. Well, I don't know. I'm gonna have to backtrack because what just went through my mind? I'm thinking about the Holocaust right now, right? I'm thinking about the children of Israel, hundreds of years of slaves in Egypt. I'm thinking about black folk here in the United States being slaves for 400 something years. I imagine that there was a time where it did look like apathy. I just read a thing the other day that there's an inscription on a wall in a German concentration camp where a prisoner inside of that, a Jewish prisoner, inscribed on the wall inside of the wall in the concentration camp that said, if there is a God, he will have to apologize to me. There are times where it looks like God is being apathetic, where it looks like he is not paying attention. But God says in his word that those who have sown to the wind will reap the whirlwind. Be not deceived. God is not mocked. Whatsoever a man soweth, whatsoever a woman whatsoever a nation whatsoever a church sows, that shall they also reap. That in the end, when we see God's final outpouring of his wrath, this is what we read in the book of Revelation in chapter 14. It says that God's wrath will one day be poured out without mixture into the cup of his indignation. David wrestled with this thing in Psalms chapter 73. In Psalms chapter 73, David said, I looked at the prosperity of the wicked. I looked at all of the goodness that they had. They seemed to have wealth beyond what they can imagine. Their eyes were fat. They scoffed at the heavens. They looked at God and did all the mess that they wanted to do, saying, how does God even know? He's not paying attention. And David said that my feet were well nigh slipped when I saw the prosperity of the wicked, and I looked at all. He said, I was chastised every morning until I went into the sanctuary and I understood their end. God's wrath will one day look like something that none of us want. That's not true. I'm sorry. I'm still a little petty. I got a little petty in me, Elder McCain, and I have to admit, I do want to watch. I do want to watch what God does to Satan. I do want to see it. I do want to see what happens to those who have perpetrated so much evil and hardship, and say there's part, maybe God's got to work on me a little bit. Maybe there's something He's got to wash out of me. But there is something that says when God's anger and His wrath is poured out, that it will be something that the earth and the world has never seen. People today, they're afraid of what man can do. God says this: do not fear man that can kill the body, but fear him which can destroy the whole soul in hell. And so there's some things that we got to look at. Look, there's a whole lot that we have to look at in this week's lesson. We're going to stop now because it is time to make our transition into our Discovery Factory for the morning. So as we do that, I want to encourage you, keep on studying your Sabbath school lessons this quarter. Very excellent lessons this week, particularly this week as we're talking about the wrath of God and seeing over and over through this week's lesson, even though we didn't plan it, how God's wrath is poured out, particularly, specifically in cases of injustice and oppression of not just His people, but people in general. All right, we're going to swap to the screen now as we just begin to move into our Discovery Factory this morning, as we begin to get into our Crime and Social Justice Intensive. So as the guys in the back get us switched over to our screen, we want to just share with you a little bit. Some of you may be here for your first time today, or maybe watching for the first time today. New Hope is in a point in the midst. We're smack dab in the middle of a 5-week series in which we are doing a community engagement intensive. Community engagement intensive for the last 3 weeks. This is week number 3. We began this series in week number 1, talking about community engagement. We began on what topic? Who remembers? Education. We learned a lot of things in that intensive about education. And then we moved from education on last week, we dealt with what? Economic development. Let's do that. Okay. And then when we moved from economic development, by the way, anybody remember anything from last week that stood out to you on economic development? Somebody said we need more money. All right. And today we're making this transition into crime and social justice. All of these areas are areas that we're looking at over the next 2 years. We want to be very intentional in finding ways to be of service and to be of relevance to the community in which we serve. Going to watch this quick video again, 2 minutes video. You've seen it before. We're going to play it again, and then we're going to move into our Discovery Factory for the day.
At New Hope, we believe that faith is more than words. It's action. That's why in 2025, we are launching a year-long initiative focused on community engagement, inviting you to join us in sharing the love of Jesus in practical, life-changing ways. In education, we'll partner with local schools to support students and families, ensuring that they have the resources and encouragement needed for academic success. Through economic development, we'll empower individuals and families with the tools they need to thrive, offering financial literacy, job training, and entrepreneurial support. Crime and social justice means standing with our community, advocating for fairness, mentoring young people, and working together to create a safer, more just future for all. In community health, we'll promote wellness of body, mind, and spirit, offering health screenings, fitness programs, mental health resources to help everyone live their very best lives. And in environmental stewardship, we're taking steps to care for God's creation, leading cleanup projects, planting trees, and promoting sustainability. We invite you to join us in this movement. Together, we can meet real needs, bring hope, and transform lives, one act of kindness at a time. Be a part of something greater. Let's make 2025 a year of impact, a year of hope, a year of Jesus in action.
Lord require of you to do justice, justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. It matters to Seventh-day Adventists because Seventh-day Adventists believe the Bible, believe in the Word of God. And the Word of God says it is our duty. This is what He requires of us, to do justly and to love mercy. You've heard me go over this before, that it's interesting that in the text, it does not say He wants us to love to do justly. He says love mercy, but do justly. Even if you don't want to do it, if you don't like it, just do it. Do justice, love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. That's why God has an issue with justice, or why Seventh-day Adventists believe in pursuing justice, is because it is what of us? It is required of us. What about social justice? This is going to be a little bit more abstract, but you got to catch this. In the book of Revelation, nobody does the book of Revelation like Seventh-day Adventists do. You know that, right? And we go to the book of Revelation, chapter 13, and beginning in verse 11, the Bible says this, and I saw another, what? Beast coming up out of the earth, and he had, what? 2 horns like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. We understand this to be the prophetic rise of a nation state that will one day oppress the people of God. Here, when we see this dragon or this beast coming up out of the earth, how many horns does it have? It has 2 horns. What do those horns represent? For ages, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has taught that those horns represent either of 2 things: the separation of church and state, but also the difference of religious liberty and we don't know, do you? One horn represents religious liberty and the other one represents, and see, the reason you don't know is because we stopped preaching it from where we began. In the early days, the Seventh-day Adventist Church was teaching and preaching that those 2 horns represented religious liberty and civil liberty. Woo! Yeah, we're going to have to spend some time with that. I got to get my guest up here. But religious liberty and civil liberty. We know about a whole lot about religious liberty. We want to be able to not have to work on the Sabbath so that we can obey the Bible commandment to keep the Sabbath, the 7th-day Sabbath, holy. We believe that. We know all about that, right? We believe that Sabbath starts from sundown on Friday to sundown on Saturday. We've been believing that, teaching that, praying that, singing that, preaching that for years and years and years and years. So we know about the encroachment and the infringements on religious liberty. But when it comes to civil liberty, I wish I had the time, and I don't. I got to hurry up. Let me just go to the next slide. Social justice is civil liberty. social justice is civil liberty, and civil liberty and religious liberty are very linked, because we see them on those horns that comes up out of this beast that comes up out of the earth, that at one point looked like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. What's going on with crime? Crime. I talked to the state attorney's office. They sent me an email yesterday. And they said that their top concerns in crime had to do with what? Youth crime rates. And I looked at an article the other day, and it said that Broward County, or Fort Lauderdale specifically, Fort Lauderdale, are y'all ready for this? That Fort Lauderdale was the third highest city in the nation when it came to crime rates. Third highest in the nation. And when they're doing crime, they're looking at violent crime and property crimes. But when they put violent crimes and property crimes together, and then they added some other factors that had to do with how well the community is prepared for safety when it came to natural disasters and some of those other things. When they put all of those factors together and they measured every city in the nation against them, Fort Lauderdale came as the third highest ranking city in the nation as being an unsafe place to live. Now, I'll give you the reference, because sometimes you got to weigh how everybody looks at those numbers. So that's one thing. But our state attorney's office, Mr. Harold Pryor, office sent me yesterday. He said this was his concerns: youth crime rates. He said, number one, He said, number one, violent crime. Violent crime is defined as what? Willful, aggressive acts inflicted upon a person or property to which such treatment threatens, inflicts damage or pain, or causes physical harm. In layman's terms, violent crimes are those that involve the use or threat of force onto another person or property. Violent crimes. So that was his number one concern. State attorney's office. State attorney's office said number two was on youth crime, by the way. This is just for youth, by the way. This isn't the general population. This is just for young people. He said number two was possession of guns. And except in the state of Florida, except for specific exceptions, it is illegal for anyone under the age of 18 to possess a firearm. Now, there are some exceptions. As you read the law, you'll find what they are. But that was his number two concern. Number three concern was written threats. Written threats. Parents should monitor their children. This is coming directly from his office. Parents should monitor their children's phone and social media usage. A written threat is a what kind of offense? Student writes on a piece of paper to their teacher, I'm gonna, oh, y'all said it, not me. All right. That is a felony offense. It does not just have to be written on a piece of paper. It can be in a text message. And it doesn't have to be from a student to or a young person to an adult. It can be from a student to another student, a child to another child. And if it's written, if it's in a text message, it is a prosecutable felony offense. And then finally, number four, they said retail theft. Parents should avoid leaving their children at shopping malls and plazas without supervision. When I first got to New Hope, can I tell y'all what I used to hear from our kids? I'm not going to tell you. I'll tell you later, because I need to get our guests on. Very quickly, social justice. You're familiar with this term? E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Come on, y'all are from Jamaica. Y'all supposed to know what this. Yeah, okay, all right. However, this is a very American term. There is dripping, Americana is dripping all over this term. It is written on the currency that we use, e pluribus unum, out of many, one. Do you know what this equates to? This American ideal? Oh, you'll recognize it. It equates to diversity. That this is a land that was born out of the aspirational, I'm being very intentional with my language, out of the aspirational ideal that this ought to be a country, a land that is diverse in its makeup. Here's another term. You've heard this one before. What does that say? Liberty and justice for all. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. It is part of the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America. There is nothing more American than liberty and justice for all. But you know what this is? There's another way. If I were to pick one word to describe what this is, I could say this is talking about equity. Are you seeing it? All right, here's another phrase, and I'm going to turn it over to our panel. To form a more perfect union. 1789. The founders, the forefathers of the country got together and they write an article, and this article is signed by the forefathers. It is called what? Not the Declaration of Independence, but the Constitution of the United States. Part of the preamble to the Constitution of the United States, Constitution, the sacred document of the land, includes this phrase: to form a more perfect what? Union. Coming together, all of us together. If there was a phrase, a word rather, I would say, what is that talking about? Do you see what we just did? What was the first word? The first word, diversity. Second word, equity. Third word, inclusion. You've been hearing that a lot, haven't you? You've been hearing it as something that is un-American. You've been hearing it as something that is divorced from and apart from the idea of what America is supposed to be. Yet in our founding documents give testimony to the idea that these things, if there's anything that is American, it is diversity, equity, and inclusion. It is etched into the founding documents of this nation. And these are the things that ensure, or set up, aspirationally anyway, to ensure that social justice is something that is encoded into the fabric of our nation and of our society. And yet we are seeing these things before our very eyes being eroded step by step, stroke by stroke, dare I say, executive order by executive order, and it's happening in front of our eyes. I'm happy today. Now, we've got a panel today that was originally, going to look like this. Pastor Gary Gordon called me last night. He is unable to be with us. Kaisa Early, are you here, Kaisa? Are you here? You're here? She's not. Okay, she's not here at the moment, but let me go back here. What we do have is our mayor. Former Mayor Dale Holness. So I'm going to ask that you could come up and join us on the stage. Let's give him a warm welcome this morning. Mr. Mayor, so grateful and thankful for you to come and to be with us today. Okay, all right. So, and sharing or asking, taking us through this next portion of our program today. Mr. Mayor, we're going to have you just take a seat up there on the stage, and we're going to invite Pastor Victor Wallen, who's going to be asking some questions, interviewing our mayor today. There will also be opportunity for you to ask some questions as we look through this topic and work through this topic of crime and social justice.
again.
It's great to be here in the house of God.
Good to see you again. We have been looking at and observing your active participation in the community for many, many years. And we applaud you for that. We applaud you for that. I know that you're quite familiar with Adventists. And more than that, just familiarity with Adventism, you are also quite familiar with a lot of their theological positions. I am an Adventist, and I also am familiar with a lot of their theological positions. But I am also aware that Adventists are not the only people in the world. And we have an obligation to understand the rest. And personally, I believe that God raised up Adventism to challenge a lot of the status quo that's there. And we are never to be a people who just go along to get along. So I start with something very fundamentally American with which I disagree. They have a thing saying, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States. Well, as an Adventist, I have a different pledge. I pledge allegiance to the oppressed peoples of the world and to their realization of who they are. One people under God in need of liberty and justice for all. That is my pledge of allegiance. My pledge of allegiance is to the people and to the realization of their need. Secondly, and I'm getting to you with crime and justice for a while. Secondly, I take the Bible seriously. And one of the things about Adventism is that at times we have to realize that it's a growing religion. And because it's growing, we have to address some of its history. Some of its history. Number one, central to a lot of Adventist history is the whole notion of Jesus coming again in 1844. Now, what is alarming about that, we had a people who thought Jesus was coming in 1844 when a whole people were in slavery and they weren't involved in the second coming at all. And that is something which is a little off. So when we talk about the need for social justice, we have to look at the theology of a people as it relates to social justice. Okay? Traditionally, we've been behind on that. And I am so happy to see this thing that you have put out that addresses some of the gaps, the lacuna. So I'll let you talk about that for a while as it applies to our experienced Adventists in Broward County. Before you jump at that, I just want to tie it with the church. A few years ago, the church started this thing called End It Now, where they wanted to address issues relating to women in the church. And Adventists also have this mighty health system. So all of these things are involved in the notion of social justice. Women, crime, health, and all of that. And I'm happy to see the thing you've put out. So I'll just let you talk about that, and then we'll talk.
Well, thank you so much, and good morning, church. I'm grateful to be here with you, Pastor Paul, thank you for the invitation. And what you have started on is something that I've worked on for many, many years, for most of my career in the political arena, and even before that, as a community builder. And in terms of my connection to the church, I just spoke to my aunt Esther, who is an Adventist. So when my mother left Jamaica in 1969, I lived with her for 2 years. Needless to say that at Sudbury, our Orange Adventist Church in St. James, Jamaica, every Saturday I was at Sabbath school. So I do have a strong connection here. And I've stayed engaged with the Adventist churches. Most of the pastors have become friends of mine over time, and I've visited practically almost everyone here in Broward County. Pastor Paul, I commend you for your leadership, for being the visionary enough to know that Christ and Christianity was inclusive. It was an outreach. It wasn't within the church or in a building. He went out amongst the people. He fed those who were hungry. He healed those who were sick. And there's a scripture that talked about what you do for the least of these, you do unto me.
Matthew 25.
And I certainly hope that more Christians would live that life.
One of the things I wanted to help you push into the thing, Brian Stevenson and his Equal Justice Initiative says there are 4 things that must happen. One is you have to get near to the problem. Get near to a problem if you want to change. You can't change it from afar.
Gotcha.
You have to get near to the problem. You have to change the narrative. You have to do something courageous, and you have to have hope. Now, you have identified how you have gotten near to this problem.
Yes.
Could you help the people understand how close we are to the problem to which many people are blind?
All right, so there's a document that I gave Pastor Paul a few of. I developed this many years ago. In 2018, I presented this to the Broward Black elected officials. I was chair of the Broward County Black elected officials at the time. And we looked at lives in Broward County and sought to see how we could create equity, inclusion, and diversity. What are the policies that we needed to put in place? But before we got there, what I had to do was do the research, and I got my staff to do the research and come up with the data. So in this document that we have, you will see economy, you'll see criminal justice, you'll see education, you'll see employment. It's all in this document. And I'll give you some of the statistics that you should be aware of. And this, again, is dated a bit from 2018.
It's probably worse now. It's probably worse now than 2018.
Well, I pray that it would be a little different. But black youths arrested, 74% compared to 12% Hispanic, 14% white. By the way, let me go on a little further.
You know what percentage of Broward is Black County?
It's 30%.
30%. So we arrested 74% of the time.
Or youths. So let's look at something else here. In the prison in Florida, in our prison system, 47% of those who are in prison are black. Blacks only make up 16.9% of the population. Now let me give you some of the things that I believe help to contribute. Certainly poverty is a problem. And W.E.B. Du Bois, the founder of the NAACP, back before he started the NAACP, did some research, and he found that no matter what your racial background or ethnic background, Wherever you have high poverty level, you have high crime level. And he looked at New York in particular. When the Jews came in, high crime spike. Italians, high crime spike. Irish, high crime spike in the neighborhoods where they settled. But they were able to assimilate into our system and give them equal opportunity or better opportunity than others, especially black folks. So when their wealth increased, guess what happened amongst them? Absolutely. So that's a big factor. But let me give you something else that's affecting us today very directly. In the state of Florida, if you're black and you commit a crime and you go before a white judge, Tampa Bay Tribune studies show that you'll get a 20% longer sentence for the same crime as a white person, on average.
And in Philadelphia, it was demonstrated that just being darker, if you're two black people, but if you're darker, the darker person gets a longer sentence than the light-skinned person.
It's crazy. Here's something else. If you're driving in Palm Beach County, ACLU study from 2017 shows that you're 3 times more likely to be stopped for not wearing a seatbelt if you're black than if you're white. In Miami-Dade County, it was 2.2 times more likely. In Orange County, Orlando, 2.8 times more likely. In Broward County, 1.9 times more likely to be stopped for not wearing a seatbelt. In Broward County, of 90 judges, only 11 were black at the time, and the number still stays about the same. In Broward County, in 2019, 55% of convictions were of black people, even though blacks only make 30% of the population. And this is from the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Criminal Justice Data Transparency Dashboard. I'm not making these numbers up. It's there in the state of Florida, the Florida Department Criminal Justice, the Law Enforcement Criminal Justice Data Transparency Dashboard. The Florida Department of Juvenile Justice shows that in 2019, 65% of youths that were arrested were black. CDC says it's 75%. I gave you the 78% before also. Now,
so what does a church do in light of all of these statistics?
very, very good. Also, in the document that I handed out, there's a section that says solutions. And we must increase the community vigilance and paying attention to it. Some of the Adventist churches are part of a group called Bold Justice. Anyone heard of Bold Justice?
Never heard of it.
You have never heard of Bold Justice? No. Okay. Or pastor over at Plantation led it for a while. Pastor Rose worked with them to put some things in place. One of the things that we work together to put in place is to put in place a diversionary program, civil citation expansion program, where if you're a young person, or if you're a person at all, for minor offenses, we don't give you a criminal record. I've worked closely with State Attorney Harold Pryor. In fact, I was on the phone back and forth with him this week, and a young man who got in an accident, lost his mind pretty much because his car was written off. Police were wrong at chasing somebody, hit him, and they wanted to take him to the hospital. He didn't want to go. So in his frustration, he hit the ambulance with his fist. They put a felony charge on him that the damage to public property was more than $2,000. They still haven't come up with where they got the estimate, how much but you know what? Why 2,000? Because if it's less than 2,000, it's not a felony. Just this week. So what I put in place in Broward County is this. For minor offenses, loitering, if you have a little bit of marijuana, 20 grams or less, if you shoplift for a small amount of money, just vagrancy. Those minor offenses that we end up putting people in jail for, we make it so that you can get what's called a citation, practically a ticket, okay? You go through a program and you complete that, you have no felony record. Because what ends up happening is when you have a felony record, how do you get a job? Where do you live? How do you get to school? How do you even serve the country? So there's a huge issue there that goes beyond these things. So we have to look to restorative justice.
Unless you can become president with a felony record. See, that's one thing you don't have to look. When we talk about the inequality of justice,
Absolutely.
you must understand that in America, justice is colored.
So there's two things, and I agree with you 100%. We see from the data that justice is not colorblind. But we also see something else from data, that if you have money, you can buy the justice you want.
And if I might just introduce at that point a very important theological concept. Adventists have this notion of remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy.
Yes.
But it's been largely misunderstood. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy is merely the preamble. The main part of that commandment relates to work. 6 days shall you labor and do your work. In other words, in 6 days you should be paid enough so that on the Sabbath you have time to rest without having to worry about anything else.
Yes.
So when people do not have proper employment and they cannot afford to rest properly, you need to see that as a violation of God's principles and another illustration of how the beast operates.
You're absolutely correct. So a couple of things that I've worked on. One is the drive to get to $15 an hour. We passed that law. We're now at $12 an hour for work here in the state of Florida. But also, I put in place an ordinance called Broward Workforce Investment Program, where if you're hard to hire, which means that you might not have attained a high school diploma or GED, if you have been on welfare for a long time, if you've been unemployed for a long time, if you're coming out of or prisons or jails, if you serve in the military and didn't have the skill sets developed, that you be given preference when Broward County contracts to do business. So if you create 2 or more jobs, half of those have to be targeted towards these folks. So we built on that. We now have an organization called OIC, Organization Industrial Centers, started by Reverend Sullivan back in the 60s to help black folks train and develop themselves to get jobs in the corporate world. OIC now has a $4.3 million contract that helps our people. And we focus heavily on those who are coming out of our jails because recidivism is a real problem. Because when someone comes out and can't make a living, what do? They go back to what they were doing before. Those people today make about $19 an hour starting. And they go through a training program and skill development program while they're doing that.
You see, one of the things we have to do is to reinterpret our view of violence. Galtung talks about the whole idea that when a people do not have access to the resources that they need for life, that is violence. So one of the things that we have to look at is the extent to which the whole legal system is violent, because it denies people access to the resources for their life. You see, and those are things that, let me give you an example. If somebody dies of Ebola, that's death from natural causes because there is no antidote for it, nothing. If somebody dies from tuberculosis, for which there's an abundance of resources, but they died because they could not have access to those resources, those people died a violent death. So what we need to look at is the ability or the inability of citizens to have access to resources before they commit crimes, the lack of access to resources after they commit crimes, and then we need to charge the society with the denial of opportunity for people to have access to resources so that they can survive.
So a part of the solution that you'll find in the document, I'll read what it says, because my brother here is correct. It says, address the socio-economic conditions that force young people into crime rather than punishing those young children for minor offense crimes, by increasing the use of diversion programs. It also says, and here the church comes in, promote restorative justice. Promote the philosophy and the socioeconomic benefits of restorative justice through a variety of community forums, churches, not-for-profit, business network groups, community action groups, social media. We have to help to reframe the mindset of people.
One thing that is missing there, though, Brother Dale, in you, is the school system.
We have that. Because a part of what this has is education. So if you flip to the education section, you'll see where we address the issue of education being a place that we need to build, because there's a huge disparity that exists there also that needs to be fixed. And I have to tell you, I worked closely with Superintendent Runcie when he got here, and he did a remarkable job until he was pushed out. He increased black male graduation rate to within just a couple of percentage of white graduation rates. He built a system where within the school system today, there are training programs, so when a high school person graduates, I think there are 60 different certifications they can have that they can go out in the workplace and utilize. So there's a whole system that needs to change, but the church needs to be engaged. The church in the black community is the largest institutions. In fact, in some poor communities, there are more churches than there are businesses. Christ didn't come and go to the church and not participated outside.
But the church is a business.
It is a business, and I agree with that. But we're talking about a building that is often not used more than, in this case, your church may be different. It might not be used more than 3 times a week, okay? In the whole week, the church might be occupied for 8-10 hours. It's a place where we should be looking to bring our young people in, giving them classes, building a mentorship program here. Some of the seniors, the elders who have worked, who have skill set in nursing and carpentry and whatever it is, bring some young people in, mentor them. That's something I did within my office also. I had the largest number of interns in the county. I put that in place from my days in Lauderhill as a city commissioner. Even before that, in my own business, I built that because the youths are the future. And if we don't invest in them, we'll have a tough time. Because I tell you this, I look around the room and I see some of you here on Social Security already. And some of you might be on Social Security soon. But understand this, if we don't have productive people coming behind you to pay into the system, you're not going to be able to collect no money. That's what brought Greece down, Portugal. Japan is struggling for years now because they don't have young people in the workforce. We have to build that. Let me continue with this. Build a state-of-the-art facility that includes a detention center. The detention center is right down here in Broward at 95. I've been there several times. It was in bad shape. We fought hard to ensure that it was upgraded and that it become a place not where you just go drop kids off and leave them there, but you put some education and training programs in place to help them while they're there. Or let's expand civil citation. I talked a little bit more about that we're able to work with the churches to do that. Expand Ban the Box. And let me tell you what Ban the Box is, because I passed it in the county. Ban the Box is if you go to Heartbeat to get a job, there's a box that you check that said, have you had a criminal history? And usually that's the first thing on the application. Absolutely. Once you check it, sometimes it's discarded. Now here's the deal. Some people, because they don't want to deal with that, because they figure they're not going to get an opportunity if they check the box, they used to not check the box. Okay? Or they lie. What we did at the county today, Broward County, you go apply for a job with Broward County, there's no box to check. The only time we ask you is at the end of the interview, once we determine you have the skill set. And if you're going to work amongst children or in some secure places, then we will go into that kind of stuff. And you get a rebuttal. So you could say, well, you know what? I was 16 years old. Hang out with the wrong people. I've restored my life. Here's who I am now. I'm a part of the church group youth program. Okay? I went out and I did stuff to help rebuild the community. There ought to be redemption. And unfortunately, our criminal justice system don't allow for redemption much at all.
So, Brother Holness, let's put some clothes on the skeleton.
Yes.
What is your recommendation for the New Hope Church to bring in more young people, and how do we train them?
Great question. I agree with that. So one.
Because look around.
Yes.
Everybody in here is old, except one or two people.
And the church is dying as a result.
Yeah. So what should the church do
So
to
here's
bring
what
in
I'd
more
suggest.
young people?
Here's what I suggest. I gave you one already, one nugget. Mentorship program. Bring those young people in. Each of you here, find some young person that you can mentor. Whatever profession or job you're in, find someone you can help train and develop. Give them the contacts and the resources that you have now developed over time to help them along their way. Two, put some sort of scholarship program in place. Okay? Even if it's $250, $500. Let the young people come in and write essays as to when they get a degree, when they finish school, how they're going to help the church grow and build. Okay?
All right.
Make sure that you have fun stuff for them to do. Okay? Young people like excitement. You were young. Didn't you like to be excited at the time? So let's create a fun atmosphere. Don't make your program so long that it becomes dreary and boring. Ensure that you're supporting businesses that offer internship and apprenticeship to young people. And get some of your young people here involved and engaged in those programs also. So I've given you a bunch of stuff here. There's, again, if you have this, I know Pastor has put together a very strong, powerful program. And I must commend you, sir. We were on radio this week. And as I promised you, I have a radio program 2 days a week for 2 hours, Mondays and Tuesdays. You are welcome anytime.
I have one more question for you.
Yes, sir.
You're in a church,
Yes, sir.
a Christian church.
Yes, sir.
By and large, a church is a voluntary organization of women that's run by men. Now, what is your recommendation for getting all these women in church more active in the leadership of the church?
Ooh, you're putting me in some hot water now.
Well, that's
I think
that's a regular place for politicians.
so let me say this. It has to do with your regulation as a church. It has to do with your bylaws and rules.
Those have to go.
It has to do with how you change the system, how you encourage that participation. And change is not always easy. And sometimes people like me are called radicals because you want to see something change and something different. So I would say, brother, you can help lead the charge since you're a male, and it's dominated by male mostly. Your voice need to be out front and loud.
Well,
because when you want change, the easiest way to get change is for those who are in power to change from within. That's why I got elected. I want to change the system. I couldn't change it from outside. I mean, I could make a lot of noise, but on the inside, I could do stuff like pass in Broward County a criminal justice and police oversight board. I could put in place an ordinance creating a racial equity task force. I could put in place policies that ensure that small minority and women-owned business gain more contracting and business opportunity, moving it in 2010 when I got elected to the county from 10.25% to when I left the county in 22, almost 50%, $248 million that year. When you're inside, you have a better chance of changing the system than when you're outside. Hence, participation in the system is important. Just to go back a little bit to solutions. One of the goals that we set was to increase the number of black judges, because I told you the statistics earlier, from 11 to 20 by 2030, to increase the number of black elected officials. In 2020, if you were a voter in Broward County and you're black, you got a card called a Black Voters Guide with a lot of black folks' face on it. It had the African collars on it, the Black Voters Guide. With that system and effort that I led, we got 5 blacks elected across the county. They said it couldn't have happened. The 5 constitutional officers, the sheriff, the state attorney, the public defender, clerk of the court, supervisor of elections. And just now, we elected the tax collectors. 6 of the 7 constitutional countywide seats are now held by blacks. That's a part of the empowerment that we must do. When the other folks had the opportunity to be in power, they put their people in. I'm not saying put people in that won't do right. But understand this, that when you're inside the system, you have a better chance of changing it than when you're outside of it. So voting is important. Voting is important. For the U.S. Congress, I lost by 5 votes. Every vote counts. You have to be engaged. Understand your vote is your voice. There are a lot of people making noise today, but they didn't vote, so the voice wasn't heard then. You think it's going to be heard now?
all right. We thank you very much for
Thank you for having me. God bless you. And I'll make sure I leave my offering for
And,
your youth program.
And, you said something, I don't know if you really meant it, that you're more effective when you make change from inside.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of room for you to be effective here.
Well, I'm here.
So we invite you to be inside New Hope on a regular basis so we can see this can be ground zero to show for the whole county. How you can be in a church and make change. You know, so.
God bless you all. Thank you so much. I have a bunch of events today. I'm missing a funeral that started at 10 o'clock. At 12:30, I'm with FAMU. They have a scholarship program I'm supporting to get more black lawyers in the state of Florida. At 6 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, I have a Zoom building a Jamaican connection group. At 6 o'clock, I have two events. One for a community group that helps folks who are needing food and support, and then also being honored by a group up in Pompano. So I got a packed day. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here to share these few moments with you.
Mr. Mayor, thank you so much. Elder Wallen, thank you so much. What an honor, what a privilege it is to have you with us here at A New Hope today, and we look forward to seeing you next Sabbath. All right. Blessings. We're going to make sure that we get some of these in your hands. We're going to keep a copy so that we can make some more copies so that you can have this as we go forward. All right, we've got about 20 minutes between now and when we move into the next. So this is what we're going to do. What you heard today, I want you to spend a few minutes among yourselves talking about what we've heard. So we're going to group up, and I need a facilitator, elder. If you would be one of my facilitators on this side, and I'm not going to try to make you move a whole lot, so we'll just do two sides. This side, and Elder Gale just got up and moved, so I wouldn't call him. I knew that's what he was doing. So Patrick, if you would lead this discussion on here. I just want you, we got about 15 minutes. I want you to talk among yourselves and see what are some of the other issues that you can identify that are crime issues in your neighborhood, or social justice issues in environments and schools and workplaces where you are. I want you to find a scribe in your group. Find a scribe in your group to go ahead and to make some notes. So we're going to do that for the next 15 minutes. Patrick, seeing that, not just guessing. We want to hear what are you actually seeing that are issues as it pertains to social justice as well in your neighborhoods and where we're at. So got about 15 minutes. We're going to let you begin right now.